From the middle of the 15th century to the very end of the 19th century, millions and millions of Africans were forced into slavery. Unlike previous reasons for slavery, America's objective was to make a profit and to also express their hatred towards colored people. The brutal procedures these slaves were put through were all powered by one inhumane reason: racism. Africans who were captured were transported to America from Africa through the infamous transatlantic slave trade and were subjected to such harsh conditions that the mortality rate upon arrival was 50%. The Americans forced many changes onto slaves, including language and behavior. Along with being stripped of their freedom, African slaves were forced to change their one and only hope, their religion.
Slaves in Africa were captured and transported from their homeland to America. Due to many different African tribes, the slaves had many differences. They spoke a variety of different languages, had different rituals, and prayed to different gods. Over time, the amount of slaves grew drastically. The main problem with a large amount of slaves was the risk of a slave rebellion, so slave owners had to find a way to prevent this. So, in order to control the slave population, slave owners forced slaves to believe in other religions. Slaves were forced to convert their religion into those of their owners. The African religions and traditions would now be replaced by their owners' religion. Most of the owners were Christian, and so the slaves were forcefully converted to Christianity. Some of the rituals the slaves brought over did not completely disappear. The majority of the slaves accepted the new religion because it was easy to adapt to their own culture. They would also incorporate their own aspects into the religion. Despite losing their stories, they still applied some of their style of singing to the hymns they were forced to learn. Most slaves had Sundays off and they went to church.
Is it true they have a diary of your great-grandmother's?
She was one of the lucky ones that could read and write.
Can you tell us one of her diary entries?
My name was on the church book when I was 10 years old. Father's master sprinkled me when I was 10 months old.
When I was in Kentucky, I went to church with the white people at the Methodist church. I sat way back behind. There were 3 seats in the back and a gate between this part and the other part in front, where the white people sat. When they had revival, they would open the gate and come back there and ask them some questions and try to have them believe.
And if they said they believed, they would sprinkle them. The Baptists did the same thing. At the house, I didn't get to eat at the table with the others, but when the old man got through with his meal, or got through eating, I could sit down and eat with the rest of them.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner, for sharing your great-grandmother's diary entry.
It was sometimes hard to convert slaves to Christianity, but slave owners had 2 main ways. The main way to convert slaves to Christianity was by preaching a message all slaves wanted to hear. The message was that all Christians were equal in the eyes of God. When slaves heard this, it gave them hope and a reason to live when their masters abused them. It helped them knowing that someone more important cared for them and loved them all. The second way was to hold similar services to ones the slaves used to hold. This normally involved enthusiastic singing and dancing. Not having to change their style made it much easier for slaves to attend Christian services. Slaves sometimes didn't agree with the message white-controlled churches were teaching, so they held secret meetings in invisible churches. Invisible churches were a place where slaves listened to preachers that they chose without their master's knowledge. These invisible churches taught different messages to white-controlled churches. White-controlled churches mainly emphasized obedience, while invisible churches focused mainly on hopes for the future and equality. In these invisible churches, it was safe to mix African beliefs with Christian beliefs. Attending these meetings was also a way for slaves to express emotion and let go of their hardships. These meetings often included singing and dancing. Attending these meetings was forbidden though. Slaves used secret messages and signals to attend these meetings without their owner's knowledge. The punishment for attending these meetings was very harsh and included whipping.
The African people transported to America became slaves and had their religion greatly altered. Slave religion was greatly impacted as their beliefs and culture were stripped away from them. Not only this, but a new religion would be forced upon them. Even after 100 years since the abolishment of slavery, the effects of changing a slave's religion is still present.